Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4, where we are talking about the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So, just kind of a high level overview here. If we're looking at the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance, these are two periods that are truly marked and shaped by some pretty significant cultural, political, and artistic transformations, really seeing how art is evolving into new shapes and how that is driving and driven by these cultural and political shifts. We also are seeing during this time some pretty significant religious influence and some changes in philosophy there. We're also seeing a very wide expansion of intellectual inquiry, creativity, as well as education. And art and architecture are truly reflected in these shifting worldviews and social values. So, if we're looking at the society and politics during the High Middle Ages, we can see that feudalism really structured this medieval social and political life. We can also see where monarchies and the Catholic Church really were competing for ultimate authority. We were seeing how folks that were basically lineaged into position were sort of fighting against the divine. And we saw how the Crusades did increase cultural exchange between regions. It was also a very bloody time in our social history. And towns and trade networks were expanded throughout Europe, largely due to the crusades that were going on that were driven largely by the Catholic Church. And we are also looking at how religion and intellectual life was shaped during that time. We saw that Christianity was really shaping morality, education, and even daily routines. We saw monasteries being identified and tagged as the folks that were responsible for preserving knowledge and classical manuscripts. And universities were emerging during this time as centers of scholarship and debate. It's interesting to see that there are colleges and universities that were started during this time that are still in existence. Hashtag Oxford. And we see that scholasticism truly attempted to reconcile faith within reason. And what's interesting and not mentioned here is that all of these opportunities were really only open for men. So women were largely boxed out of any of these opportunities truly, and it was justified through the idea of religion. And we see how Gothic architecture and medieval art was really inspirational and important during this time. We see that Gothic cathedrals did emphasize height, light, and spirituality. We saw these flying buttresses that did allow larger windows and taller structures to be implemented, and stained glass was being used to communicate these biblical stories visually. And religious themes did dominate the overall painting, sculpture, and music during this time. And if we're looking at how literature and cultural identity was shaped, we can see evidence of really epic poems and romances reflecting these medieval ideals of honor. And Dante's Divine Comedy did explore the idea of morality and salvation. Dante's also responsible for writing the Inferno. And we saw vernacular languages become more and more common in literature. And lots of these stories that were coming out of this time did reinforce these religious and social expectations. And with the rise of the high Renaissance, I mean, this is just a whole shift, right? We're looking at a totally different perspective and worldview on living, life, afterlife, everything. And the Renaissance did really focus on humanism, and it emphasized this human potential and achievement. And so artists started to study anatomy, proportion, and also classical antiquity. And we can see evidence again of elitism where wealthy patrons were funding these artistic and intellectual production. So the large portion of artists and thinkers of the time were, I don't want to say like dirt poor, but they certainly were not of the elite class. And Florence really became the major center of Renaissance culture, Florence, Italy. And when we look at Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael, no, we're not talking about the Ninja Turtles. We're looking at Leonardo da Vinci, who combined science, engineering, art. Also, an individual who looked at physical anatomy in a pretty significant way, as well as Michelangelo, who also emphasized the importance of emotional intensity. And Raphael was known for bringing about harmony, balance, and composition in the space of nature and human expression. And these Renaissance artists, these are just three, but all Renaissance artists really elevated the social status of the artists to become a place, to bring them to a place of real significant social importance. And the Renaissance did offer a large number of innovations in human expression. We see that linear perspective created this realistic spatial depth in painting. So this was not to say the first time, but certainly one of the most widely used ideas of the time, being this idea of linear perspective, sort of giving a sort of 3D feel, if you will, to paintings. And artists did focus on realism, individuality, as well as movement. Classical Greek and Roman ideas were absolutely influencing philosophy and art during this time, and also music, literature, and architecture, again, really reflected these human ideals and humanist ideals, really sort of centering the idea that human beings were significant contributors to overall intellectual thought and growth. And mannerism and cultural transformation, mannerism really challenged the Renaissance balance and symmetry. And artists during this time were using more distortion, tension, and exaggerated proportions. And this art reflected the uncertainty and social instability of the era. And so these cultural movements did reveal these connections between society and creativity. And we can even see that going on into today. That, my friends, is the overview of this particular chapter. When we are looking at the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance, it's definitely important to remember again that this is a time where art, literature, society, culture, all definitely intertwined and all being shaped by each other. Thank you for watching, and we will see you all next week.